So before we get off like down these rabbit holes, let's talk about the new book. And it's like brand spanking new as of like right now. Right now we're in the middle of February, close to the end of it. And it just came out on prophecywatchers.com.
Yeah, we have it. We have it at Prophecy Watchers, and it doesn't come out on Amazon until March 4th. So we
Okay.
got some advanced copies of the new book. But yeah, and I got my new background here. When I was
Okay.
young, I was a rabbi taking care of some cows, and so you can
Yeah,
kind of see
apparently you never
my
needed anyone.
exactly.
That's you. How'd you get the beard like that with the like,
Is that you know what it took me a while to grow that out and my hat and everything, but
yeah,
yeah,
mine's almost there. I just keep shaving it. That's the only. Mm.
yeah.
Yeah. So, being that we have all these red cows in here, what does that have to do with prophecy? And why is it not on my prophecy bingo card?
That's right. That's a great question. I think for those that have no idea what we're talking about, hmm, the reason this has kind of come to back in the news, we'll say it that way, is because a couple of years ago, it's September 15th of 2022, five red cows were sent over to Israel. And so that really kind of brought it back into the forefront of what prophecy watchers have been looking for decades, and that is the birth of a pure red cow, which is part of the third temple preparations. Because again, we know that the Jewish rabbis desire to build a third temple. We know that prophecy teaches
Hmm.
that that will happen. And one of the other things that desire to do, or they know they need to do, is to have a red cow, a pure red cow, a female cow that has never been worked or hasn't had a yoke on it, that is unblemished, and they are going to burn this cow. They're going to slaughter the cow and then burn the cow on the Mount of Olives, is what the Talmudic and Mishnaic writings tell us, the Jewish oral traditions. And they'll take those after the cow is done. They'll take the ashes from the cow and mix it with water, and then they'll be able to sprinkle not only the people but also the vessels and all the implements in the people location, etc., in order to purify them ritually. And so this is why the red cow comes into play, because there are, as we mentioned, five red cows that were brought over. Two of them have become disqualified. There are still three remaining in the land of Israel,
Did they
and
not
they
win
came
the
of
race or
age.
something?
What's that?
Did they not win the race?
They didn't win the race. They got disqualified.
Mm.
Um,
They weren't
most
transgender cows, were they?
that would have been a disqualifying marker, that's for
Yeah.
sure. And they were not confused, but you can see our cows. They know who they are. They know what gender they are.
My name is Millie.
Billy.
Yeah, Millie the cow.
They actually have names for the five cows that
Hmm.
were brought over. I list the names in the book, and what we have is, I'll just say it here, that for truly, and this is a very serious thing, in that the for the first time in 2,000 years, we have at least one qualified red heifer,
Wow.
and in fact, we have three. So this is truly unprecedented in the history since the first century, when the temple was standing and Jesus was there. So it's not the fascinating thing about all this is we're watching the end of the age come to unfold. We're living in exciting times in that regard, that this is unprecedented. So
Hmm.
this isn't made up. It's not sensational in the one sense. We're not fabricating it. It's just like, wow, here we are in these very unique times.
Yeah, we're just kind of watching it. So for people like me who don't understand, why does it have to be a red cow, and how do those ashes make you pure? Can you explain some of that?
Yeah, what's fascinating about it is this is why the title is The Mystery of the Red Heifer, because what is well known, in
Hmm.
which, again, for us, I don't follow the rabbis, but it, we're trying to understand it from their perspective, because a lot of the stuff that they're doing is, again, ends up being prophetic even though they don't know it. And so the mystery of the red heifer is that if you go to Numbers chapter 19, the the ceremony itself, where the high priest who needs to be pure, and again, for people that might not know this, as a Christian, we don't think in terms of purity. We think in terms generally of, am I forgiven? Are my sins forgiven? And that's very reasonable because we don't have a temple. We don't go to a physical temple in that regard to offer sacrifices. But in the Old Testament, not only did they do that, they went to the temple to offer their bull or their offering or their lamb to get forgiveness. But in order to even show up at the temple, you had to be ritually pure. And so uh, ritual purity was very clearly, especially in Numbers 19, it was lost. Like, for example, if you were around a dead body. So if you're around a dead body, you become ritually impure, and now you are disqualified to go near the temple. That was what God said. You are not allowed to come. So what they did was God created this inexpensive way for the people of Israel to become clean again ritually through the ashes. And so it's not so much, you know, the in the sense of practically cleaning your body, but from God's perspective, when you would get sprinkled with this water on the third and the seventh day, according to Numbers 19, that ritual impurity would be removed. The mystery behind it is it's kind of amazing because priest who was pure, who would perform the ceremony, became impure. And then the person who was pure that would go collect the ashes would become impure. But yet those same ashes would be used later to purify him. So it's like this is kind of the mystery behind it, and it's so fascinating that the rabbis are very clear in their understanding that they said, Solomon was the wisest king, and certainly the Bible says that in First Kings, wisest man, and yet they said even Solomon couldn't understand the commandment of the red heifer.
That's a
But
conundrum.
that's exactly what they say. It's a conundrum. But for us who believe in Jesus, and we go to Hebrews 9 and other passages, if you put Jesus right in the center, the mystery's solved, because Jesus, who performs the ceremony, who's pure, becomes impure because the sin of the world is put on him. And then when he goes and fulfills the work, his work actually turns around and purifies the other people. So it's fascinating that you have this imputation or this transference of purity and impurity back and forth. But when Jesus is put in the middle, 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, he who knew no sin became sin for us, so that then we become the righteousness of God and other things. And so it's not a surprise then if for our rabbinic friends, if we said, I know that Solomon didn't understand it, but when you put Jesus in the middle of it, it solves the mystery.
Wow.
No surprise.
And that's all in the book.
But that's in the first chapter of the book.
Oh, that's right out of the gate. I love it.
Right out of the gate.
So, and that kind of reminds me of the whole bronze serpent on a pole thing. It's like,
Exactly.
Who knew what that meant? They even started to worship it. But here's all these pictures and metaphors and types and patterns that God was using to try and explain to us creatures that live in these 4 dimensions about a 10-dimensional universe. Hey, it's kind of like this, but not really. And so he gives us all these pictures and patterns. So that's really exciting. Now, just for some reason, it popped into my mind. Were those the same ritual water buckets that were at the wedding at Cana?
Yes. What you have, what's significant about those, and this is interesting too in John chapter 2, is that according to traditional, impure. For example, let me give you one example. If a person was impure and they were or a dead body or something, and you had the stone could not transfer impurity. So this is what the beauty of the stone was. Other vessels could transfer impurity to one another, but if you had the stone pots, they were immune from transferring impurity from one place or one person to another. So
That's
when
interesting.
you see in John chapter 2 the stone water pots, I think there's a definite deeper story there.
Hmm. So they should everybody get a stone drinking vessel for the next pandemic they throw around because it can't
Exactly.
transfer impurities. Oh, that's exciting. So right out of the gate, you explain the whole mystery of it. And is this like a follow up of the first book, or is it just like a prequel of it?
It's actually a an updated version. What I did was because I wrote the previous book, a couple years ago. A lot has changed,
Mm,
and so I wanted to update not only like this chapter that this talking about the mystery part was not in the first one, and so it's like, you know what, they updated. There's probably about 4 or 5, maybe 6 new chapters in the book.
hmm
Um, where, like I talked about this, I also over the past couple of years, even on your program, questions have come up, and I decided I'm going to include a question and answers chapter of some common questions that come up. I included another chapter of other, our brothers and sisters in Christ who reject the idea of a future temple. They're more of a replacement theologian type,
hmm
and so I thought, you know what, they had their objections. Like, well, Mondo, don't you know that the temple is the church? The temple is your body. There is going to be no future temple, and so I wanted to address that, and
hmm
so I did. I wrote a chapter on that. Well, let's what are our options from like we were discussing earlier. How do we interpret this? What does Professor Hermeneutics say?
Mr.
And
Professor Herman Nudix.
we could bring him out. So those were good questions, and I addressed those, and I added a couple other things in the book as well. So this is it's an updated, revised book, brought into consideration too some of the latest events with Hamas.
hmm
I mean, Hamas very specifically mentioned the red cows, what that looked like. Also, what the Trump administration coming in, how that would most likely influence or impact the timing of the Red Heifer ceremony.
hmm
So I put all these other things in there that weren't in the first edition.
Oh, that's cool. Because they there were those who I will kindly say not very bright, who said that the only reason that Hamas attacked on October 7th was because they were planning to sacrifice the red heifers. I'm like, no, that's it's because that's what they do.
They don't need
It's
a
like
reason.
the
They don't need a
scorpion
reason.
and the frog. Come on.
Exactly. Yeah, it was a nice propaganda piece
Mm,
to use, but no, they didn't. They don't need a reason to kill Jews. This is just it's just what they do, like you said, sadly.
yeah, and that's sad. Which that brings us to Gaza, I think, a little bit too. Do you have anything else to say about the book
The
as
only thing
far?
I would say is that uh, right now, the reason why I brought up the Trump administration is because, as we know, the Biden administration was very anti-Israel. I mean, they just were. They were not friendly to Israel. They would stab them in the back. Well, now that Trump is in, as we can see, Trump has released the weapons that Israel legally purchased, which were
Mm-hmm.
being withheld. Trump has recognized the challenge of the Palestinian situation. He's also been very pro in defense of Israel and wanting to see them live in peace and harmony without threats, through strength. And the other thing that has really occurred in Israel proper is within the rabbinic movement itself, they are overwhelmed with joy and enthusiasm for Trump coming in. And for them, they were squashed by the Biden administration to do anything related to a third temple or to
Mm-hmm.
upset the status quo. And Trump doesn't care about the status quo. In fact, he's very clear that the status quo needs to change because people are tired of living in it. And so, as we know, going back to when Trump moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, they minted a coin. It was the
Mm-hmm.
Trump coin. And they called him a Messiah figure based on Isaiah 45, where Cyrus, the Gentile, basically Medish king,
Hmm.
Medo Persian king, sent the people back to build their temple. And so God calls him by name and calls him a Messiah. So they are calling Trump a kind of a second generation Cyrus Messiah figure, and they made the Trump coin from that. Well,
I have one.
do you really? Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
I got one somewhere too in my office,
Yeah,
and
it's in like my coin box or whatever.
the coin box. And so now that whole mentality of Trump being used by God to further the Israeli or Israel agenda spiritually, they are again enthusiastic and they believe quite strongly that it'll be under Trump's protection that not that the, most likely the temple would be built or permission would be given, but also that the Red Heifer ceremony would take place because that ceremony would most likely take place prior to the start of the construction of the third temple. And so to see this happening right now, the excitement and anticipation, optimism for the Red Heifer ceremony has never been greater than the exact moment we're speaking in right
Yeah,
now.
how about that?
Originally, they were supposed to have it last year, but with Hamas saying what they did in the Biden administration, it got squashed. But all that's out the window now.
Hmm.
Things have changed.
And now it's kind of like a spring loaded. They were ready to go, but now they held it back. Now it's going to spring even further.
Yes.
So that's going to be exciting. So how does the how does all that work? Basically, is what I'm trying to say. Like, where are they going to sacrifice the cows? Is it going to be near Gaza? Is that why they were upset, or is it going to be near Jerusalem? What's the deal?
It is very clear in the tradition that in the Bible it just says outside the camp. So originally, when the first red heifer was slaughtered, they are very careful too that it's not a sacrifice. Sacrifice takes place on the altar. This cow is not sacrificed and burned on the altar. Numbers 19 says outside of the camp. So later, we don't know exactly. As they're wandering the wilderness, it was just outside the camp. But later in the first century, the last time it happened, it was done on the Mount of Olives, which is just east of the Temple Mount across the Kidron Valley. So they have two pieces of property that they've purchased. It had to be very specific at eye level so you could see down into the temple, which again was in the first century. And so their goal, their goal was to do it last Passover and got interrupted, but it was going to happen on this piece of property just north of the Church of All Nations, which is right there in the Kidron Valley. And so because of that prescription, it has to be done there. What they do is they will build a wooden pier,
Hmm.
and then they would put the cow on top, and they will slice the neck of the cow, bleed it out. They'll take, just like the prescription says in Numbers 19, they'll take the blood, they'll sprinkle it towards the Temple Mount area, and then they burn the cow whole. And they did a practice run a couple of years ago on this, a few years ago actually, and it took before the ashes were cool enough to collect.
We'll move your mic in. I lost you for a second.
Yeah, it's kind of going in and out there. I'm not sure why. But they did a practice run, and they took a 600-pound cow. They burned it, collected the ashes. It collected 145 pounds of ashes, which was sufficient when mixed with water in the right proportions to sprinkle over 600 billion times. So there certainly was enough to sprinkle the people and the locations and everything else. So that's the plan. The plan is to do it on the Mount of Olives, and the plan is to do it in a way that invites everybody to come in. They don't want to do it in secret. They won't do it in secret. They couldn't do it in secret anyway because of the location. It's surrounded by Palestinian areas. So if again, this is a huge bonfire. So it's not like it burns for 2 days. So it's not like you could get away with it in secret. The fire department would be called, the police would be called, the security would be called. There'd be a mob. There'd be a
Yeah,
riot.
drones flying over, taking pictures.
Absolutely. So When they do it, it'll be done with celebration. And this is why they wanted to connect it kind of with Passover or even the Feast of Pentecost, the
Hmm.
Feast of Weeks, because those are the times when, as we know, if you've ever been there, people have been to Israel during these times. There's lots of celebration. The Western Wall Plaza is filled to the brim with people, lots of again of joy, and they want to do it during one of those times.
Oh, that'd be interesting. That can fit into a lot of things. Let me ask you this, in your humble yet totally accurate opinion, um, do you think this was similar to times when the judgment was pushed out? So maybe God is giving him a little more time to say, "Hey, before the rapture happens, let's give a little more time." Like Methuselah was 969, the oldest living man, because of his mercy, the longest thing. Do you think because of their plans and then was pushed out just to give people a little more heads up or give a little more mercy? And then the timing as well, because some people believe that the rapture will be on Pentecost, or Shavuot, because they are under the impression that Enoch was born on Shavuot and also taken up on Shavuot on his birthday. Okay. And then, so if Enoch is representative of the church being raptured up, then maybe the church which was born on Pentecost, will also be raptured up on Pentecost. What do you think about that?
Well, they're like Gary Stearman, very strongly believes in a Pentecost rapture,
Hmm.
and for all the reasons that you just described. And so, to me, it wouldn't, I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. And as it relates to God, is always, I mean, we know Second Peter 3, it answers. Anytime we look and we recognize that the rapture didn't happen today, it just means God gave a little bit more time for that exact reason, what you described, because God's not willing that any should perish, but all come to repentance. And so every day that is delayed is another day of God's patient waiting, so to speak. And so the timing as well is very interesting because uh, I tend to think, which I don't know this for sure, but I tend to think that the construction of the temple will occur after the covenant that the Antichrist makes with the Jewish people to reestablish the Mosaic covenant in the land. It says he'll make a covenant with the people, or really, literally, what it says is he will cause the covenant to prevail.
Hmm.
Um, and
Confirm it.
so, yeah, I mean, so in that sense, I think that what he's referring to, the covenant he's referring to there, is the Mosaic covenant. I don't think it's a necessarily a peace agreement. It doesn't say peace anywhere in the text.
Right.
So the word covenant in the book of Daniel and the other places refers to the Mosaic covenant. So the Antichrist is going to come and he's going to cause the Mosaic covenant to prevail in the land. This is very interesting, which includes the temple and everything else, which is, if you ask the Jewish people, what are they waiting for? What do they want? The rabbis, anyway, they're going to say, no, when the Messiah comes, he's going to bring Moses. He's going to bring the Mosaic system back. That's their entire focus. So I think he's going to fulfill Daniel 9:27 in that regard, which means part of Moses, the Mosaic covenant, is the temple. And
Hmm.
so I think the temple will probably most likely be constructed after he causes the Mosaic law to be to permeate or prevail in the land, which it will be after the rapture. It'll be after that covenant is signed. But so even though I don't necessarily think that I will witness the construction of the temple, hypothetically it could. I'm just saying if I'm going to lean in a direction, I would lean that I wouldn't. But
It makes
that's
sense.
not,
Mm.
yeah, that's not the case with the red heifer. The red heifer can happen anytime.
Mm.
Um, and so we're also dealing with the challenges of there's no upper age. That was one of the questions I always got. What's the upper age of the red heifers? No upper age, according to the rabbinic tradition.
Really? Oh, I thought
Yeah,
it was. I thought it was like a max of 5 years or something.
no, they
Oh.
it says I put it in the book. It's quite clear. Um, I'm quoting the rabbinic writings that there is no specific age. There's a minimum age, which is 2 years and 1 month, is the consensus, but no upper age. The only thing that it's just risky because the older they are, like look at me, like you get
Hmm.
gray hairs, right? And so
Oh, I hadn't noticed. Yeah.
yeah, it's fairly few. And so these cows could get old and start becoming unqualified through hairs or a blemish or whatever. So I mean, the timing is, we're in this very interesting window. And if it's not these three cows, that's okay. The other two cows that have become disqualified, remember, these cows were $100,000 each. So
Wow.
the other two cows are being artificially inseminated in order to continue they have good genes, they have good genetics. And so they are being, inseminated to continue the line of cows in the Israeli breeding.
Hmm.
So it's pretty
Yeah, is
fascinating.
that one of the things? It's got to be born in Israel too, because I don't.
It does not have to be born in Israel. We know
Hmm.
that because, again, going back to the rabbinic writings, I mentioned this in the book too, because these are all the great questions that come up, and I decided I'm gonna put a whole chapter on those because of good people want to know, inquiring minds want to know, and so there is not a requirement that it has to be born in Israel. I think that the the rabbis would prefer that they're born there, but it's not.
Hmm. That's interesting. And so again, another question would be, I guess the father would have to be all red too to kind of lean in that direction that you get an all red baby.
You would think, yeah, you would think that the genetics would be very helpful if, as they are breeding, like as we know, breeding programs are, like with dog. I mean, if you bring two Chihuahuas together, it's extremely unlikely that a Great Dane's going to be
Hmm.
born
It is
out of the
unlikely.
Chihuahuas. You're able to breed them down to where those other genetic features are bred out of the
Hmm.
gene pool. And so in this thing, whether it's darkness or white hairs or black hairs, most of that is bred out. And so they are they are really working on it. When the first five came were purchased, they actually had 20 cows to choose from,
Hmm.
and there were 20 options. But there's a law in Israel against importing beef, and
Ah,
so
okay.
they couldn't import the cows. So what they had to do was they labeled the cows as pet, and of the pets, you could only have five. So they actually had nine that they were going to purchase, and they realized, oh no, we got to do it as pets, and we can only bring five at a time.
Oh.
So
Well, you just
that's
get
how
another guy. He could get five too.
you
Hmm.
would think so.
Right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's what I do when they're rationing out the eggs at the store. I mean, my wife will split up. You buy a dozen, I'll buy a dozen. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yep.
So, as far as the 7 years we were talking about the rapture and all that, so they're expecting Moses to come back, and as we know, they're also expecting Elijah to come back. So that would also lend credence to the opinion that the two witnesses are Moses and Elijah, would it not?
Think that from my understanding is um, I don't. I know the Jewish people are expecting Elijah. I've never seen that they're expecting Moses
Well, you
specifically.
just said
However,
so that they're expecting the covenant of Moses.
yes. Now they want the Mosaic covenant to be reestablished, which
Mm.
includes all the 613 commandments. Um, but the person of Moses, he's dead. But Elisha, we know in Malachi chapter 4 that God says He's going to send Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord. So they know that passage. That's why at Passover, when they
Mm.
do their Passover meals, they have the chair over there. The chair is empty because that's Elijah's chair, which they are expecting. But I do agree with you that if we were to look at the evidence of all the different passages related to the two witnesses, I would be very surprised if it was not Elijah and Moses for a lot of reasons. So
Mhm. Yeah,
that would be interesting.
my main one is this, and I'll be there's a lot more to it, but the nutshell is, it was Moses and Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration,
Mhm.
and they represented the law and the prophets. Okay, and then he's like, "Hey, let's build a house for all of you," and he's like, "Nope, law and the prophets are done with. It's all about Jesus now. This is my son. You hear him." So I suspect it was also the same two that were maybe at the grave. Say, what are you looking here for? He's not here. And then in Acts chapter 1, he's like, why are you looking up? He's coming back the same way. I suspect that could be them as well. But even in Revelation, it talks about when the angel says, "Oh, don't bow before me, because I'm one of your prophets. I'm one of your brethren, the prophets." So angel being messenger, angelos, I'm thinking maybe the ones that are proclaiming all these judgments are the prophets that they actually the ones that they did. So if Jeremiah said it's going to be this and this, he's going to be the one actually proclaiming that during that 7 years, because he literally says that I'm one of your brethren, the prophets. Don't worship me. So, and it kind of fits into that whole genre. Okay, we got Moses and Elijah representing that for that final 7 years, dealing with Israel again, representing the law and the prophets yet again. And then the prophets are the ones speaking out the judgment because they're messengers at this point. Just like the angel of the church is the messenger of the church, and it could probably be one of the pastors there as well. That was a little bit of a whole. What do you think about that?
No, I think you're exactly right that we need to stay a little bit open-minded because the word there's no doubt some of the angels are definitely supernatural angelic beings in like in the presence of God or whatever. But as you mentioned, the word angel just means messenger, and especially with Revelation 2 and 3, send to the angel or the messenger of the church. And scholars will go back and forth on that, and you know of whether it's referring to a supernatural being or non-human being or the pastor of the church or maybe a leader. And to me, especially there in Revelation 2 and 3 with the seven churches, I think I think it seems to be referring to the leader or the messenger of the actual local church rather than a non-human. As far as we can tell, uh, there doesn't seem to be any evidence that there is a specific angel that is assigned to a specific local church in that regard. And so it would. I'm not saying it's not impossible, but
Mm-hmm.
just the evidence would be lacking that each angel would have or each church would have a specific angel assigned to it. We don't see that anywhere else. But again, I think like you said, we need to be open minded to that idea because it wouldn't be surprise me either in the sense of recognizing that what we see in the book of Revelation and the allusions that are there, the allusions to the Old Testament, uh, it's very, very clear that God is fulfilling his word, which he has spoken from the beginning
Mm-hmm.
through his prophets.